You've been lied to about self-improvement. Not in the obvious way. No one handed you a pamphlet and said, "Here's how to spend your life chasing a finish line that doesn't exist." But somewhere along the way, you started performing your own life instead of living it. Think about it. How many mornings have you woken up and felt an invisible hand push you toward becoming the better version of yourself, without ever stopping to ask who decided the current you wasn't enough? How many nights have you stayed up scrolling through life hacks, while a quiet voice in your chest wondered if you were just rearranging the same pieces of the same puzzle you've been working on for years? You know the moments I'm talking about. When someone asks, "So how's life?" and you scramble for an answer that sounds like progress, because God forbid you just say, "I'm here, I'm breathing," and maybe that's already something. When you feel guilty for being happy for a few hours because happiness in your mind means you're no longer improving. When even your moments of rest feel like unpaid overtime for a job you never applied for. Here's the truth you've probably avoided. The pursuit of better can become the most elegant form of self-rejection you'll ever practice. And the part of you that keeps resisting, the one that says, "Enough," in the middle of another morning routine, the one that skips the podcast, the one that wants to just be, might not be your enemy. It might be your last defense against losing yourself completely. So before we go any further, let's pull on the thread you've been afraid to touch. What if the self you've been working so hard to improve isn't the one you were meant to keep?
There's a peculiar violence in the way you treat yourself, isn't there? The way you dissect every habit, every thought pattern, every emotional response like a scientist studying a particularly disappointing specimen. You've turned your own life into a project that never quite reaches completion. Your phone is filled with apps tracking your sleep, your water intake, your meditation streaks. Your bookmarks are a graveyard of morning routines and productivity hacks. You know the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. You can explain the neuroscience of habit formation at dinner parties, and yet you still feel that gnawing scent that you're not where you should be, that everyone else figured out some secret you're still missing, that if you could just find the right combination of practices, the right mindset shift, the right way of thinking about your thoughts, then you'd finally arrive at this mysterious destination called better. But here's what's happening beneath the surface. You've mistaken activity for progress, movement for growth, the constant changing of strategies for actual change. You're addicted to the promise of transformation, not transformation itself. Your relationships suffer because you're always analyzing them instead of living them. Your work feels hollow because you're perpetually preparing for some future version of success. Your present moment gets sacrificed on the altar of who you might become tomorrow. The cruelest part, you've convinced yourself this relentless self-optimization is self-love. But love doesn't demand constant improvement. Love doesn't withhold acceptance until certain conditions are met. Why does this pattern feel so familiar? Because it didn't start with productivity podcasts and meditation apps. Picture yourself at 8 years old watching the adults around you. Maybe it was a parent who only smiled when you brought home good grades. Maybe it was the way praise came only after performance, attention only after achievement. Maybe it was subtler, the way love felt conditional on being good, being helpful, being better than you naturally were. You didn't do anything wrong. You did what any intelligent child would do. You learned to earn love through improvement. You discovered that the quickest way to safety was to become someone worthy of it. The problem was never you. The problem was that you had to become a problem solver when you should have just been allowed to exist. That 8-year-old is still running the show, you know, still believing that acceptance is something you earn, not something you deserve, still convinced that the real you, the messy, imperfect, sometimes lazy, sometimes confused real you, isn't enough. So you learned to live in the future tense, to find your worth in your potential rather than your presence, to love yourself conditionally, the same way you learned love worked when you were small and trying to figure out how to be safe in the world. The self-improvement industry didn't create this wound. It just gave it sophisticated language and endless tools to keep digging deeper. Every new framework becomes another way to avoid the fundamental question: what if there's nothing wrong with you that needs fixing? Your protective strategy worked. It kept you striving, achieving, becoming, but what served you then now confines you. The very mechanism that helped you survive childhood has become the cage that keeps you from living fully as an adult, and that's what will start to shift in the next few minutes. What if I told you that your resistance to self-improvement isn't laziness, it's wisdom? There's a part of you that's been watching this whole performance with growing concern. It's the part that feels heavy when you open another self-help book, the part that rolls its eyes when you start another morning routine, the part that just wants to lie on the couch and watch terrible television without it being a rest day in service of some larger optimization strategy. You think this is your shadow speaking, the lazy, undisciplined, unambitious part of yourself that you need to overcome. But what if it's actually your soul, exhausted from being treated like a machine that needs constant upgrading? Consider this: you are not a problem to be solved. You are not a project to be completed. You are not a rough draft of some better version waiting to be born. You are a human being who is already whole, already worthy, already enough. Not as a platitude, but as a fundamental truth. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote about the necessity of living your questions rather than forcing answers. What if your restlessness isn't a sign that you need more tools for change, but that you need more courage to be still? What if your dissatisfaction isn't pointing toward what you lack, but toward the exhaustion of pretending you're not already complete? This profound rebellion in choosing to be satisfied with who you are today. In a culture that profits from your dissatisfaction, contentment becomes a radical act. Not the contentment of giving up, but the contentment of recognizing that the person you've been trying to become has been here all along, buried under layers of should-bes and could-bes. But what if this clarity is only the surface of something more powerful waiting in the shadows? Jung called it the shadow, not the evil in us, but the parts of ourselves we've deemed unacceptable and pushed into darkness. In the context of endless self-improvement, your shadow might be the part of you that's perfectly content being ordinary, the part that doesn't want to optimize, the part that chooses comfort over growth. We've been taught to fear this part of ourselves. The productivity gurus warn against it. The motivational speakers demonize it. But what if this resistance isn't your enemy? What if it's your guardian? This part of you remembers something crucial that you've forgotten in your quest for betterment, that you were born worthy of love and belonging, not because of what you might accomplish, but because you exist. This part holds the memory of who you were before you learned to perform worthiness. When you feel that familiar resistance to starting another habit, to implementing another system, to becoming another version of yourself, that's not laziness speaking. That's the part of you that knows the difference between authentic growth and compulsive improvement. That knows the difference between expanding into who you truly are and contracting into who you think you should be. This shadow aspect of yourself has been carrying something precious. Your right to be human, flawed, inconsistent, sometimes motivated and sometimes not, sometimes clear and sometimes confused. It's been protecting your humanity from the mechanization of self-improvement. What would happen if you stopped running from this part of yourself? If instead of trying to overcome your resistance to optimization, you listen to what it's trying to tell you, the answer might surprise you. You wouldn't lose your ambition. You wouldn't become lazy or complacent. You'd become more authentically yourself, which is far more powerful than any optimized version could ever be. And if you stop running from it, you won't lose yourself. You'll reclaim yourself. There's a moment that comes to everyone who's been trapped in the self-improvement cycle long enough. It's quiet. It happens in the space between one breath and the next. It's the moment you realize you've been holding your breath for years, waiting to become worthy of exhaling. What if the goal isn't to eliminate your flaws, but to befriend them? What if your procrastination is telling you something important about your relationship with pressure? What if your anxiety is pointing towards something you value deeply? What if your tendency to avoid difficult conversations is actually a sophisticated way your system protects itself from overwhelm? This isn't about giving up on growth or settling for dysfunction. This is about recognizing that real growth happens not despite your humanity, but because of it. Your imperfections aren't obstacles to overcome. They're the texture that makes you real, relatable, trustworthy. The most magnetic people you know aren't the ones who have optimized themselves into perfection. They're the ones who've learned to move through the world with their whole selves. Shadows and light, clarity and confusion, motivation and resistance, all integrated into something authentic and alive. There's a specific kind of freedom that comes when you stop trying to improve yourself into someone else's definition of success. When you stop measuring your worth by your productivity. When you allow yourself to be ordinary on Tuesday afternoon without it meaning you've given up on your dreams. This is the whispered permission you've been waiting for. You don't have to earn your place here. You don't have to become someone else to deserve love, success, or peace. The person you are right now, tired, confused, imperfect, trying, is not the rough draft. This is the real thing. So if you've been waiting for permission to be yourself, this might be it. Picture someone you deeply love. Maybe a child, maybe a friend, maybe a pet. Now imagine telling them they need to be optimized, that their natural way of being isn't enough, that they should track their habits and measure their progress and constantly work on becoming a better version of themselves. You can't do it, can you? Because love doesn't demand improvement. Love sees worth that exists prior to achievement. Love recognizes wholeness that doesn't need to be earned. This is how you can learn to love yourself, not as a project, but as a presence. Not as potential, but as enough. Not as who you might become, but as who you already are. The irony is that when you stop trying so hard to change, change happens naturally. When you stop forcing growth, you grow in ways that feel organic and sustainable. When you stop optimizing your life starts to feel like yours again. You might still set goals. You might still develop new skills. You might still have ambitions and dreams and desires for your future. But they'll come from a different place, not from the frantic energy of trying to escape who you are, but from the grounded confidence of someone who knows they're already whole. There's a Japanese concept called wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, the elegance of things that are weathered and worn and imperfectly human. Your life doesn't need to be optimized to be beautiful. Your days don't need to be productive to be meaningful. Your very existence doesn't need to be improved to be valuable. You are not a rough draft of some better person. You are not a problem waiting to be solved. You are not a machine that needs constant upgrading. You are a human being having a human experience in all its messy, imperfect, unoptimizable glory. And that has always been more than enough.